can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Matthew Tsang of AndHumanity. You can check him out at andhumanity.co. And before I formally introduce you, Matthew, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, some other cool agency ones, Kevin Hurrigan on, who runs SpinUtech. He started his agency, Matthew, in 1995. Okay, so it was really interesting to hear kind of the evolution of the internet business and agency life as he went through the different decades. And he shared some really good lessons there. There's another one, Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey helps pair agencies with private equity. So he helps sell agencies. He's got the Second Bite podcast, which is phenomenal. I've listened to every episode, but he's found that he'll help sell the agency to private equity. They'll roll some equity in, the private equity will sell again, and sometimes those founders make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So just interesting, the valuation space, agency space, and everything like that. So check out that and more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So Matthew, we call ourselves kind of the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the hosts so they can create amazing content, amazing relationships, and most importantly, run their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships, and I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. We have a lot of free episodes actually on every question we've gotten, so you can check them out, look them up on the podcast as well. I'm excited to introduce Matthew Tsang. He's the co-founder of AndHumanity, as I mentioned, andhumanity.co. They're an integrated, inclusive marketing and communications agency with the core purpose of serving people-first brands that want to leave a legacy of belonging. So I know he looks young, but over his 15-plus year career in marketing communications, his work has been featured on a lot of different platforms: Marketing Magazine, Global American Marketing Association, AMA, conference, and more. And AndHumanity has actually authored a book on inclusive marketing featuring certified Jedi experts. You're going to have to explain who the Jedi experts are, and are also founding members of the Global Inclusive Marketing Alliance. So Matthew, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you for saying I look young. I'm going to repeat that to my partner later on. She always says that, hey, you got another old spot here. You got another wrinkle here. So I love it.
No, I don't think so. Anyone who's looking at this will verify.
It's got a good filter on.
Certified Jedi expert. So we'll talk about AndHumanity and what you do, but start there with the book and some of the lessons from the Jedi experts.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jedi, first of all, stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. You may have heard of DEI, EDI, DEIA, etc. We use Jedi for two reasons. The first, more philosophical reason is that justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, the J at the forefront, kind of talks about how marketing and advertising and communications as an industry tends to, unfortunately, you can say, utilize DEI performatively in the sense of greenwashing, pinkwashing, whatever it may be. And what we're trying to do by focusing on the J is systemically change the way you can say the agency world or the advertising world operates, because we believe in a responsibility to humanity, which I can touch on a little bit later on. But the J focuses on justice, which means focuses on fixing the system. The second reason for using the J is that I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but Jedi rolls off the tongue really nicely, and as someone who works in marketing, I love things that roll off the tongue. It's not that I don't like Star Wars, listeners, just to be clear. I just haven't watched it. And it's one of those things that it's been so long. I feel like if I start now, it's going to take me forever to get through it.
What was a big lesson, a favorite story from the book? You know, I know you have the
Oh,
book Authentically Inclusive Marketing.
absolutely. I think there are many things that I really like from the book, but um, I'll probably take my sister's story, who my sister is my co-founder in terms of this. She talks a lot about how growing up, she didn't fit into any of the predefined categories that media or the media sphere kind of showcased. And that's Tammy Tsang right there. Thanks for sharing it. But essentially, she didn't really feel like she fit into the categories that belonged in. Being a second generation Chinese Canadian settler, she was, ethnically Chinese and looked that way. However, a lot of her values and the way she was brought up, being in Canada, specifically on the West Coast, she was often told, well, you're not quite Chinese enough to be Chinese, but you're also not quite, white enough to be white. So she kind of didn't fit into any specific category. And she talks about how that lack of representation, especially on screen, on camera, through Hollywood and movies, it really affected her psychologically. And I have a similar story with that, but that is highlighted a lot in the book. And these types of stories are actually very, you can say, common and very, very commonplace for anyone with lived experience that comes from a different or underrepresented community that happen to be born in North America or somewhere where people don't look like them. So that's definitely one that resonated with me and continues to resonate to this day.
So we're looking at your website here. Okay. This
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
favorite part, my favorite part about your website, actually.
Oh
So
yeah,
people are looking at this.
yeah.
There is a video portion of this if you're listening. But I think this is you and your sister. I'm imagining it's
Yeah.
you. And so when you were younger, not this young, but obviously I always hear the stories of accidental agency owners, but what
Yeah.
did you want to be when you grew up, maybe in college and right around that time?
Yeah, as you can see from this photo, when I was around 4, I wanted to be Batman. I was like
I
obsessed
don't know
with
if that's
him.
a job career, but
Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah. I wanted to be Batman. Any superhero I was kind of fine with, but I would say I graduated with an English lit degree. At one point I wanted to be a journalist, and I did for a little bit, but where that passion sort of came from was that I just loved reading and I loved writing, but I loved reading more. So you can't see, but I have a bookshelf next to me, and I'm not as voracious as a reader I used to be, but that was the kind of the only thing I enjoyed. You could say out of schoolwork. Like I happened to be, I like to say like book smart. I don't agree with all of the education system now, but I was book smart. I was good at memorizing things and absorbing things, but applying it to real life was a struggle for me. So I felt that as I grew older, an English lit degree just happened to be kind of the thing I was most comfortable with. I went into journalism from then. I worked for a magazine or an online publication that was all about Asian representation in the media. And all this stemmed from that photo that you see on the site. And the idea behind that photo and why I showcase it on the site is um, uh, my story was around me not seeing myself represented on screen. I love Batman, Superman, etc. But when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I was wearing a Superman costume. I went I went to the washroom to kind of check out how it looked, and I realized my hair, my eyes, my cheekbones, everything didn't look, my skin color, I looked nothing like Clark Kent, and I was shocked. I was actually surprised. I was like, that was the point that I realized I wasn't white, which is surprising to think, but at the time when you're surrounded by everyone that is white, like you just assume you are, right? And at that young age too, I didn't have the self-awareness. So that kind of propelled me into this whole career of journalism, like in terms of writing for publication that was all about underrepresented folks, people that looked like me belonging on screen and on camera. But even before that, I had started a comedy troupe that was all about that was all Asian cast and crew. I had started a short film production company, all Asian cast and crew. So the psychological trauma from me not looking like Clark Kent just permeated throughout my entire life and just became my whole vocation. And yeah, that's kind of why we show that photo. And I've heard from so many different people that, wow, I thought it was somewhat unique, but not at all. There's so many people that are like, oh yeah, I I wish growing up I had the content that I see today, which is a little bit more diverse. Obviously, there's work to do, but a lot more diverse, and it builds your confidence growing up. Like even watching Shang-Chi, which was that Marvel movie. I wasn't a huge fan of it objectively, but it's like I got emotional seeing someone that looked like me that was a superhero, and it was just a weird feeling. It was like, why am I actually feeling this way? It's because yeah, it you just didn't see that growing up.
The film, I've heard you talk about it before in
Yeah,
other interviews.
yeah,
Crazy Rich Asians,
yeah,
the film. So one of my friends who's Asian, I had never heard of the movie at the time, and he's like, "I'm
yeah,
going to see my Crazy Rich Asians," and I'm like, "That's kind of derogatory." Like, yes. And
yeah.
he's like, "No, it's a movie, Jeremy." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I
Okay,
didn't not
yeah,
heard of it."
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but yeah, it is. Something about it, seeing people like you or with the same culture on screen and represented is a big deal. What made you start your company then?
yeah, absolutely. So my sister, like I said, my sister and I are co-founders of AndHumanity, but we had actually been working together many years prior to even the idea of AndHumanity. So this going back maybe almost 20 years, maybe 17, 18 years. That's when My Loudspeaker, which was our original traditional generalist agency, started. And the idea behind that agency was, we work primarily with small businesses, nonprofits, charities, and we work locally here in Vancouver primarily, almost exclusively. And, we did that for a long time, almost a decade. We grew it to a team of about 20. You mentioned about, accidental agency ownership. In that way, that was a story about that. Really, how My Loudspeaker started was my sister was a brand ambassador. So if you don't know what a brand ambassador is, she had a megaphone and would, hand out pamphlets on campus when she was at University of Toronto. And I, with my English lit degree and being 3 years younger, had no job prospects coming out of university. I didn't get into journalism right away or anything. So we had this kind of she I think felt sorry for me, and she's like, why don't we start something together that's related to, brand ambassadorship or marketing, etc. And she had come back home from Toronto,
Who
and
are the
she's
type of
like,
clients, like from a brand ambassador
yeah, it was
perspective?
like CBC television, like people that wanted to you can say focus on audiences on campus.
Oh,
So a lot of like, you might get like I said, CBC television were promoting like a show. I think it was called a program called like ZTV. They would do things like that. Other clubs and you might get like alcohol brands, the typical things that you're trying to promote on campus and things like that. I'm sure there are other things, but I wasn't there. So when she came back here, I was like, let's start that. Let's build on that business. She's like, I don't have clients here, so our mom, who was a single mom, who raised us to be quite prudent, was saying like, I don't want you to really start this business, but I understand you need to. So, but we'll give you. She said, I'll give you 1 year. I'll give you 1 year. You can work out of our basement but if you don't take off or do something, or you're not out of here in 1 year, you have to go find what she called real jobs. And coming from an entrepreneur herself, that was ironic, but
what did she
I
do?
she was an importer and exporter of women's handbags and shoes. Her job, kind of as a middleman, doesn't exist anymore. So she's retired now, but that's kind of what she did. And she had a bunch of businesses before that started and failed while my father was alive, but that last one kind of finally found some success. But point is she gave us that basement to that a small room, closet size room, basically to try to launch something. And luckily we were out in 6 months, but because we found a government contract that would allow us to promote and host a conference and everything like that. But
How'd you
because
get that as a company, as a client?
I think we applied through a grant and we had an important topic. I say I think because it was so long ago, but that was kind of like the beginning of a lot, like 4 years of not really making any money. We did move into another office, but we didn't really make any money for 4 years. I ate so many ham and cheese sandwiches, could not imagine. And so when we finally grew, like fast forwarding, when we finally grew Mindless Speaker and eventually got to a team of 20, we're both quite content. But how AndHumanity started was about 6 years ago. Tammy came to me with this idea of a inclusive marketing communications agency. This is because she was pregnant with her first child. She has two now. And she was like, hey, I want to do something that has more lasting and meaningful change. What do you think about an inclusive marketing agency? It's not a multicultural marketing agency, blah, blah, blah. She pitched it to me. I love the idea. And, that's kind of how it all started. There's a whole kind of story behind how we got from there to now. But yeah.
Talk about the evolution of services a bit at My Loudspeaker. So it starts off at brand ambassador. Did that continue on, or were there other things that you added in when you started to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not even brand ambassador work at the beginning, because that was just kind of how, like, the work that she had back then. We had no clients and no reputation here on the West Coast in Vancouver. So honestly, we did a lot of what were called at the time. We called it at the time. They were called performance installation ads. So these were what we call PIAs. We shorthanded it, but really the official term now, or even back then, was experiential advertising. We did a lot of experiential advertising. We do stunts that got a lot of PR and things like that. And
give me some examples. What are some of the favorite stunts?
So one of our first ones was probably one of my favorites. So we worked with a local university here, and one of their pains was a lot of students were really enjoying the university life, but they weren't moving on to they weren't finding that next step, being able to find that next step. Not because obviously the quality of the education, but the mentality behind students was I can live here, I enjoy the life here. They were taking maybe extra years that they didn't need to fulfill their education, and there was this kind of resistance towards growing up, which I totally understand.
Reminds me of Tommy Boy, where David Spade's like, well, I went to school for 7 years. Yeah, Tommy, they're called doctors.
yeah, exactly. Or what's they call it? The Ryan Reynolds. Was that one? Van something.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Where he stayed in school for it.
Is Van Wilder or something?
Yeah, Van Wilder. That's it. Van Wilder. So there was that kind of mentality going on. So what we did was we kind of like took this space of a major hallway and we built a dorm, and we roped it off, right? We roped it off, and we had someone sitting in there. They wore a mask so no one could see them, but they were just, it was a messy dorm. There was a TV, blankets everywhere, and pizza, whatever. And it was just kind of like set designed so that it looked like someone's dorm, obviously. And then the person would sit there literally all day. I think it was like 8 hours. We would rotate.
Was it in a dorm? Like, where was it stationed?
No, this was in it was in the middle of a building, like in the hallway. That's why it was like that. And then the sign said, you can't live here forever. And it kind of talked about the services they offer to help you transition. So that person, it got so much. I remember the person that hired us to do it was so nervous the day before because it was so unique, and also not like, for universities, bold, considerably speaking. So they were like, oh, I don't know if we should do this, but it ended up being a huge success, was written about a lot. And a lot of people were taking photos because it's like, there's this person in there, and they would try to talk to the person there, but we gave them masks so that, and we rotate in and out, and I was one of those people in masks. I had to do a shift. We all had to do a shift.
It's like Blue Man Group, like they put them all in blue so you can swap out people. They don't know
you can swap out people. but the point was that, you can't live here forever, and it kind of hit home, and talked about the services they had to help you transition out of that. Yeah.
So you'd have a company, Matthew, be like, okay, we want to get a bunch of PR. And then you come up with these creative ideas to have this experiential piece. And then it would get written up in a bunch of publications. And basically, it's just a very creative way of getting obviously awareness, but also written up in all these places.
Yeah, and that's what we started with. And for that particular client, it was more internal, an internal pain point. It wasn't about mass awareness externally. It was about, obviously the students that went to that university. But yeah, and as we grew, we started expanding our services to do, the digital age. So a lot of, website work, SEO, but also branding. We did a lot of traditional work, above the line work, like TV ads, radio ads, etc. So we did a variety of stuff and became more fully integrated over time as we grew to that team of 20. But it started out with PS. It started out with experiential. We needed to do something that was unique and creative to stand out, because we had way less experience and way less context than a lot of our competitors at the time.
So then, you and your sister are talking like, listen, what could we do that's kind of more leaving a legacy and things aligned with our values? And so you start AndHumanity. At that point, does the team from My Loudspeaker come along with it, or do you still operate them as separate entities?
Yeah, so that was the purpose originally. So when we were transitioning to AndHumanity, we had kind of let the whole team know that, hey, this is the focus. Remember, this is 6 years ago, and the transition took maybe 2-3 years too. So 6 years ago, we started mentioning to the team at the time, hey, we're doing this. If you don't want to be a part of it, that's fine. We will still run both agencies, but eventually over time, it's going to shift to all clients and AndHumanity, but it will take some time. We actually did have one person who said, this is not something, not that they were against it, it's just not something they're passionate about, and, wish us luck, and they left. But what happened was that, I laugh about it now, but it was very traumatic then, but COVID hit, right? So as we were going through that transition and that, planning for this launch in January 2020, COVID hit, and we were losing clients every day from My Loudspeaker. Like, it was devastating. So in order to actually launch AndHumanity, it was kind of a silver lining. Some good news from that was that we had time to actually focus on, okay, we're losing clients every day from My Loudspeaker. Our team is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They still want to, see AndHumanity launch, but we were laying people off because of it. So we ended up, Tammy and I spending time and more aggressively, some of the core team members launching AndHumanity. So when it did launch eventually in March of 2020, our team was a fraction of what it used to be. I think we were maybe like 6-7 people or something like that. Maybe even less. I can't remember. But luckily, you can say luckily or not luckily, but I'd say luckily there was a momentum that happened from that time, and we started, and COVID, although devastated us, at the same time it allowed for more remote work, and our office lease was expiring at that time, so there were a lot of expenses that were saved at that time as well that came from COVID, even though we're losing clients. So yeah, that transition kind of came from there. Yeah.
So at that point, Matthew, were you then still offering similar services, but then you were focused on specific types of companies?
I would say our services adjusted a little based on what the market was asking for. I wouldn't say a little, a lot. Our services actually adjusted a lot, and the companies that we were looking to work with might have shifted, not necessarily values wise, because I would like to say a lot of companies had similar values, but more to mid and larger size companies and businesses rather than small ones. And I would say the services shifted because, although we right now to this day do a lot of campaign work and creative work and branding work, etc. Because we work with mid and larger size agencies that either have agencies already or that have established brands, etc., whatever it may be, and they're looking they're looking to integrate inclusion into the work, it's become a lot of consultation, training, assessments, research, community engagement, that sort of work, which is still very rewarding. Just a shift in kind of what we used to do.
What what kind of work can you talk about that you've been proud of with AndHumanity?
There's a lot, I would say. I'll maybe categorize maybe one or two, but um, I'd say some of the work that like our one liner in terms of how what I believe separates us from others is that we specialize specifically in engaging with, understanding, and appealing to underrepresented communities. And this idea of underrepresented communities means, people with, different lower socioeconomic statuses, race, ethnicity, the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, people with disabilities, invisible and visible, all these different underrepresented communities that are traditionally not factored in or not prioritized in advertising and marketing, et cetera. So that's our specialty. We understand them, engage them. So some of the projects we've done that I'm really proud of is that, and it's kind of shown through our research. But when we do community engagement or even employee engagement projects, because we follow our motto, "Nothing about us without us," which is essentially, when it comes to research, if we're doing a focus group with people from the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, we guarantee that the moderator comes from that same community, has that same lived experience. They created the strategy, they created the questions. Like it's following this "nothing about us without us" makes it so that it's a psychologically safer space for these participants. And in line with that, and as a result of that, we have shown that this psychologically safer space has created better insight that comes from that, because people are more open to sharing. They don't feel like they need to code switch, whatever it may be. And I think that I'm really proud of that "Nothing about us without us" guideline, that we followed through with that. And now when we do community engagement or employee engagement projects, we tend to get really unique insight. Some brands, quote unquote, say, "I never knew about this. We've done a lot of research, but I've never heard our employee or our audiences say something like that before," because they didn't feel like it mattered or feel like it's safe. So a lot of the work we do is prefacing how, hey, what we're doing in terms of this engagement is going to actually change things. We're not just extracting your time or whatever. Like, you do have power and influence, and of course that means working with aligned brands. And I think other things we're proud of more towards the, you could say, external work. We have projects. I'll focus on one specifically, but where they didn't have the biggest media buy budget or advertising budget, but because our process worked on heavily engaging underrepresented communities and promoting it was a docu-series, promoting this docu-series and the content and its importance, which related to telling stories that were often untold about underrepresented communities. Because we really leaned into that, and because we worked with our network of relationships that we had strong relationships with, taking a shoestring media buy budget and being able to make it one of the most popular docu-series from this network, all because of inclusive processes and all because of relationships and meaningful relationship building with underrepresented communities, et cetera. Because I feel like a lot of times underrepresented communities feel like, especially when it comes to advertising media, they're secondary. They're not prioritized in this work. So when there's an opportunity where a brand is really leaning into it and hoping that and prioritizing them, they want to support it. I want to support it because brands don't often do that. It's kind of like the underdog story.
Talk about,
Yeah.
every company, I think, thinks about employee engagement and how they can improve employee engagement. What have you seen has worked well with some of these employee engagement campaigns that maybe other companies like, hey, you should think about implementing some of this stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to employee engagement, what works is congruence, brand congruence. What's the most important, or one of the most important things, is brand congruence. There's nothing there's very few things employees despise more when a brand is outwardly, especially I work in marketing communication, so outwardly communicating that, hey, we're this inclusive, we're doing these things, but inwardly they know that, they're spinning it, or it's not totally true, or it's a outright lie, right? So I think that congruence is so important. We always say that when we work, because we work with marketing communications departments often, as well as DEI teams, et cetera. There's often that battle from the marketing communications team to communicate something that's maybe a more positive spin. But I always say acknowledging history, acknowledging truth, and acknowledging your faults is not an uninclusive. In fact, that is necessary to build trust with your employees, so that they know that you're not trying to be performative and that sort of work. So I think congruence is one of the most important things when it comes to employee engagement. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I
Yeah.
remember interviewing, I don't know if he came up with it, Matthew, one of the top direct response marketers, copywriters. I had Joe Sugarman on. He started Blue Blockers. I don't remember, there were those old infomercials, but he talked about, one of the things he talks about in was so good about his copy, that it was, like you said, built trust, is because he would include damaging omissions. Like, he would include things, faults of the product, or fault, like something that's wrong, and just outwardly talk about it, which built trust in the copy, right? And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
sounds like the
Vulnerability
same
is not
thing.
weakness. Yeah, vulnerability is not weakness. It's strength. Which is maybe not what we were conditioned to think or thought growing up, at least in my age and era. Yeah.
Um, Talk about working with your sister a bit. And,
How much time do we have?
people have, maybe experiencing they're working with family members,
Yeah.
and how you've navigated that, because it's definitely a different dynamic than if it's not a family member, right? I mean, you're running
Yeah.
into her at holidays or birthday
Yeah.
parties or whatever.
Yeah.
And how about
Look,
maybe some of the good stuff and challenging stuff with working with
absolutely.
family?
I it's probably been 20 years now working together with her, so I have a lot of experience. I think my answer probably changes every year. But no, I would say one of the most important things, and why I do recommend it, is that um, the personal relationship always takes precedent. We will always have the foundation of love, and I know this doesn't happen, but when we go into business, and when we have our annual planning meetings, and when we talk about the business, we like our kids and our family, and that side of things is always takes precedent and is more important. And if we don't have that, then it struggles. It can struggle a lot, because I think that one thing I'm confident about is that I know that she'll never screw me over, right? And vice versa when it comes to the business, right? It would never cross our mind. It doesn't. I have that privilege and that luxury because of that personal relationship. And you may not have that even with your best friend, because they have their own family that they have to take care of, or their own motivations and things like that. It's not like Tammy doesn't, but we still are brother and sister at the end of the day, and that's the strongest bond. But in terms of that, what comes to the bad is that because we have a strong personal relationship too, you can't help but let personal relationships and problems, and it becomes muddled sometimes. And there's definitely been instances over the times that we've fought in an unprofessional manner in a public setting that you wouldn't with a typical colleague, and and people would know. And we don't hide that with brother or sister. Obviously, everybody knows, but it's something that we've gotten better with over time. There was one time in the early years where we physically fought, and our mom had to break us up, and that was almost the end of what was like infancy stage of Mylan speakers. So we talk about that fight a lot. And yeah, there's a lot of that over the years, less physical obviously over time, but uh I would still recommend it because of that core, like I've heard so many nightmare cases of people being screwed over by their business partners, etc. And I have the privilege, and I'm super lucky that I know that that will never happen. There's not a scenario in my mind that that yeah, that's how much trust we have in each other in terms of that. So, and that's something that's invaluable. So
Now, they talk about some
yeah,
of the backlash you've seen in the
yeah,
DEI arena.
Absolutely. Yeah. So um, I actually just talked about this very recently in another interview, but um, what we've concluded together in terms of as a team and with other folks I've talked to is that there was a turning point. There was a lot of momentum that was happening post George Floyd's murder of DEI and people understanding, because a lot of it is just, having empathy for people you've worked with and others that don't have your lived experience, and trying to create equity for them. And there was all this momentum that was going up, and of course there was a loud minority that didn't like it throughout the whole happening, but the trend and all the big brands were kind of supporting it. Then two things happened. The economy started struggling, right? I would say a year or two ago. The economy started kind of on a little bit of a decline, and we went into maybe like a mini recession. And Bud Light had that controversy with Dylan Mulvaney, which I'm sure you know about, or maybe you have or haven't heard
I
about.
mean, I
Yeah,
don't know really honestly the
yeah, yeah,
specifics, but I
yeah,
did see it in the news,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was that the new CMO of Bud Light was like, we want to partner with this trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney. They did. And what happened was there was a huge backlash from their audience saying, obviously there's a lot of transphobic hate out there. I won't repeat it, but the idea behind it was Bud Light in that instance made a crucial decision that kind of impacted what's happened since then. Because as being such an influential company and such a major company and major brand, they backpedal. They went, oh yeah, you know what? Let's, uh, our CMO is now the scapegoat. It was her idea, and these are not our values or whatever, and we're gonna end this partnership and everything like that. That backpedaling was everything, because during that same time, there were coordinated attacks from the right wing on Lego and other brands that were like, hey, we don't like that you're supporting the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, especially the trans community. And Lego kind of just went, well, too bad. Like, it wasn't newsworthy, right? They just didn't back. They just went, too bad, and this is the way we're going. But because Bud Light backpedaled, and also Target, then a lot of this loud minority realized, hey, we have power. We have the ability to change what corporations with 10,000 plus employees do, like their whole strategic direction. So since then, there's been coordinated attacks with, all these other major brands. And a lot of major brands are now kind of uninvesting or kind of going back on what they were doing. And as much as this is very in my opinion, tragic for these brands, who I think are going to regret this in the long run. I'm a little biased, obviously, but I do truly believe that. Is that these coordinated attacks are kind of making these brands think very short-sightedly. They're going, oh my God, maybe we should kind of uninvest in this, because now these other brands, and it's kind of creating this decline. And you have economy as that backdrop too, with the economy struggling a little bit, and elections upcoming with Trump's rhetoric around how anti-woke rhetoric and everything like that. So there's a lot of this that's happening at the same time in the backdrop that is making brands not want to invest in this. So it's very much a prudent, or they think it's like a prudent sort of decision. But what I was turned to is the facts, right? The facts are that diversity is increasing year over year, right? And I'll speak to kind of the complications, the nuance around that. But diversity is increasing year over year, meaning the 2S LGBTQI plus population already doubled. It went from 10% to 20% over the past decade or so. People with disabilities hold 14 trillion in spending power. People age 60 and over hold, I think, 25% in spending power. People from almost all North American major cities are now a majority minority, meaning the underrepresented or racially underrepresented groups now outnumber the white population. These are all based on census stats. These are all statistics. So as a brand, if you're not prioritizing these underrepresented communities in your branding, in your promotions, then you will inevitably fall behind. That's why I say it's short-sighted. And if you look at the younger generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which will end up being the primary wallet holders, I call, or primary, decision makers in spending over time, they are naturally more globalized. They grew up in a fully digital world, fully globalized. Their workspace was very when they went to work, it was already hybrid or already remote, right? These are fully globalized folks that their cultural competency has already been heightened and developed just by how they grew up. And they see it the way my generation, as an older millennial, saw the digital age. They go, why are brands doing this performatively? Why are they not investing in underrepresented communities? It doesn't make sense, like just even strategically. Because when I was growing up in the marketing world, I was investing in the digital world because I was like, hey, this is where all my friends and myself were investing in. Why don't you have a website? Why haven't you invested in your website? It's like, oh, we'll focus on TV, radio. And it didn't make sense to me. Just like Gen Z and Gen Alpha are going to be like, it doesn't make sense that brands are investing in diverse communities. And herein lies the nuance and the issue with that too, is that it's a fact that diversity is rising. But what is the problem with that is that there is a lot of misunderstanding of equity and misunderstanding of how I think you mentioned Coleman Hughes before, but how people with lived experience don't understand that inclusion works on a scale. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned, or we had talked about previously. Should I dive into Coleman Hughes now?
Go ahead.
Right?
Yeah, we were
Yeah,
chatting
okay.
before we
Yeah,
hit record,
I just
and
want
I
to make
was
sure
I was
Yeah.
asking if you had seen that, where there was this whole kind of viral thing, what happened when he was on The View, and I was curious your take on it. So that's the
Absolutely.
context.
Yeah,
We haven't talked
yeah.
about this in the actual recording yet, but we were talking about it before.
Yeah. And I realized that as I was talking about it, and sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, so about Coleman Hughes and his belief, he's a black man, conservative background, but he believes that in color blindness, or the idea that the more we give an edge or give priority to people from underrepresented communities, that's also an unfair balance. And herein lies the issue with that. It's all about equity, right? And all the facts show that underrepresented communities, whether it be in the workforce, whether it be in the media sphere, etc., we are underrepresented and often overworked in the workforce, underpaid, etc. These are all facts in terms of it, especially when it comes to women in the workforce, right? So the problem with and the purpose of these programs that give equity to underrepresented groups is not to create a new imbalance. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to right the ship. And the ship has been going this way for centuries and centuries. All we're doing is trying to right the ship back this way. And I'll go back to my example of the media sphere, right? How many stories have there been told in Hollywood or even in advertising, etc., about a second generation Chinese Canadian like myself that's grown up in Canada? And there are millions of us, right? Or grown up in North America, you can say, versus other types of movies where it's focused on and the reason why I explain this is that we have so little to hold on to with this work, and the reason why brands and organizations need to invest is because of equity, not equality. Equity is very different than equality. So what we're doing is righting the ship. And the dangers with color blindness, and you can look up Dr. Malcolm Bennett's developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. He has a scale, an inclusion scale. And minimization, which is color blindness, is right in the middle. And people that are in that middle, like Coleman Hughes, in terms of his beliefs, believe in, I don't see color. Why don't we focus on our similarities? Love is love. We're all the same. Like, why are we trying to give equity? Give equity to other people. And he is doing a disservice to history and not acknowledging that history has gone the opposite way and has been inequitable for so long. And with that is not just, slavery and, murdered and missing Indigenous women. It's the systemic structures that were built based on those beliefs that still exist today, right? That still exist today in terms of our structures. So I had a lot of my experiences in film and that intersection with justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. For so long, films like Crazy Rich Asians, shows like Never Have I Ever, all these shows, Heartstopper, that focus on underrepresented communities were not funded by studios at all. They were like, that's too niche. Tyler Perry movies, those are just for the Black community. Crazy Rich Asians, just for the Asian communities. Nobody's going to care about that. Let's not fund them, really. Let's not really give them a lot of support. But when Crazy Rich Asians came out and it was a box office hit, that's where certain things changed. It's like, oh, maybe there is some opportunity here that we're not seeing, and that will only continue to increase as diversity increases as well. But yeah, anyways, sorry, I know I've talked about it.
I have one last question before I ask it, and it just reminds me of this conversation. I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Linsanity with Jeremy Lin, but he talks about that actually. Yeah. When he was a superstar in college and trying to get to the NBA and that bias. So it was if you're into basketball and into what Matthew's talking about, I strongly encourage checking out that documentary. It's fantastic. So first of all, thanks for sharing your journey, your lessons and stories, Matthew. My last question is, I know you said you're an avid reader. I always love getting book recommendations. I know the audience does too. What are some of your favorite business books, personal development books? I mean, I have some Audible credits here. So I'm interested to hear some of your favorites. I mean, you could look at I can't see the bookshelf behind you, but if, some of your favorites throughout the years.
You're not going to like my answer. I read to escape. So I personally do not like reading nonfiction books. My sister, you can ask her, she loves it, but I read I have it here. I read fiction because it takes me away. It's like watching a movie to me. If you want a nonfiction book, our book, Authentically Inclusive Marketing, little plug. That's probably the last nonfiction book I wrote. I do have Jay Onright's number 2 book because I'm really into sports. Jay Onright, Sports Center. I have that. I'm trying to look at if there's any nonfiction books that I have here that are.
It could be some of your favorite fiction books too.
Oh, some of my favorite fiction books. The Bully Point, that's a good one. The Goldfinch is one. I know there's a nonfiction one here. Hold on, I want to not disappoint you too.
If you are into fiction, share some of your favorite fiction. So the Bullet Point, Goldfinch, what else?
Goldfinch is one. And I would say, Kazuo Ishiguro. I really like this. The Remains of the Day. The Remains of the Day is one of my favorites. I have this is classic. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I really like this. I haven't read this one yet, Quiet, but somebody told me to read Quiet. I think it's because of nonfiction. Yeah. This is nonfiction one, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. I haven't read that one yet because it's nonfiction, but yeah, I named a couple there in terms of it. But yeah, like that is one thing that I'm maybe needing to adjust over time, is to read more nonfiction, but I don't know.
Well, maybe I need to adjust and read more fiction. So I appreciate your suggestions.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Matthew, I'm the first one to thank you. Everyone could check out andhumanity.co to learn more and more episodes of the podcast. And we'll see everyone next time. Matthew, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.